Good evening, everyone. I don't know if you can all hear me. Thank you so much for coming to the Indianapolis Aero Club. My name is Paul King. I'm the current president, and I welcome you all. I look around the room and I see lots of familiar faces. I see a few of new faces, and I want to, in particular, welcome you. I want to tell you a little bit about what the Aero Club means to me. And I hope, hang on with me through this, and I think you'll get my point. About several months ago, I got ready to, we had sold our Beechcraft Bonanza a few years ago, and I was telling some other people about this earlier. I said, my wife said to me, Paul, we really need to buy another airplane. And I looked at my wife and I said, oh, honey, I love you. So we began to look around and we found a couple airplanes that looked like pretty good opportunities. And of course, the first logical thing to do is to try to get some insurance. So I talked to Chuck Poland, said, hey, who insures your Baron? And I find out that there's about half the people in this room, I think, are insured by the same guy, Herb Spear. And so I contacted Herb, and not being a complete idiot, I did call a Vemco and all the rest, and he gave me the best deal by far. And then, very soon after that, I was playing tennis with my wife, and I hurt my back badly, and ended up in a neurosurgeon's office and then a neurologist's office, and I fired both of them. And in the frustration of trying to get somebody to give me some common sense, and I went to my old friend Stan Adkins. Dr. Stan Adkins sat me down and bestowed his words of wisdom upon me. And he told me, I got the guy that needs to do surgery on your back. And John Dietz, which we don't know where he is. He's just disappeared tonight. But anyway, turns out he's also done surgery on Todd Rokita as well, I believe. But so he turned out to be fantastic. I was a little concerned at first. Stan said, well, he's an Army guy. He's what was that little school that he went to? Ranger school, but then there's that little Army school that he also went to. West Point. I think West Point. And I said, Stan, is he a pilot? Oh yeah, he's a pilot. I said, well, can't you get me a Navy pilot? I said, we all know they're better than those pesky Army guys. He says, no. He just happens to be a pilot. I don't think he flew in the Army. And he owns a Beechcraft Bonanza. It's like, okay, he's in. He's in. So we do the surgery. That was 2 weeks ago. And he said, I'm going to promise you 2 weeks of complete misery. And tomorrow will be 2 weeks. And he did not lie to me. So I stand before you completely stoned on all kinds of great drugs. So if I begin to slur my words or drool, most of the people who know me go, oh, he's like that all the time. So then I get home, and I got this bandage that's got to get replaced, and my wife is going, well, how do we do it? And I said, well, they told me, but I was stoned at the time, and so I don't really know. And so I call my friend Rodney Davis, who works for Philips Healthcare. He's one of these guys that when they sell new monitors and that sort of thing, he goes in and teaches the staff how to use them. But he's also an RN. So I called him. I said, hey, I got this whole thing. And he's, well, I'm on my way back from St. Louis, but I'll swing by on my way home, and I'll show you how to do all this. So then I get an email the other day from Dr. Peggy Chabrian. If you remember, for those of you that were here in March, our speaker was Dr. Peggy Chabrian, who is president and founder of Women in Aviation International. It's a gal that founded this thing with one member. I believe they have, 14,000 members now. For those of you who missed her, gosh, you missed a great speaker. She was fantastic. But she sent me this beautiful email and believe it or not, thanking us for inviting her to speak, saying it was an honor to speak at the Indianapolis Aero Club. And she said, thank your members for making me feel part of the Indianapolis Aero Club family. And it kind of dawned on me, the one thing that all of these people have in common that I just talked about, every one of them is a member of the Indianapolis Aero Club. It truly is this great family I've been involved in for a very, very long time. For those of you who are interested in maybe becoming a member, we welcome you to our Indianapolis Aero Club family. And I think you can get out of it the same things that I get out of it. It's just been fantastic. That being said, Todd Rokita. You would think that Todd and I would know each other from, maybe politics. Oh no, you would be wrong. And then you would say, they must know, they've lived in Indianapolis a long time together. Maybe they met each other some way. No, you would be wrong. And then you might ask, they're both pilots and they've owned airplanes, and maybe they knew each other from that. No, you would be wrong. Todd, how did we first meet?
Hockey.
Playing hockey.
One of us playing hockey, one of us trying.
I was talking to somebody about you and I playing hockey together, and I said, we played ice hockey. And I told it to a Canadian guy, and he goes, what the hell? He goes, there's no such thing as ice hockey. He says, hockey has ice. You don't have to add that in there. If it doesn't have ice, it's not hockey. I think that's right. So we're thrilled to have Todd with us and Stan as well. And that being said, Mike, would you come up and introduce our new speaker? Before we do that, the one thing that we have always done at the Indianapolis Aero Club, and this is, I think, a very great tradition, and I hope we always continue doing it. Let's stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I have to get demiked.
Does that mic work?
Oh, by the way, we are all being taped by Greg Dupuis. There's a nice, good French-Canadian hockey name for you. And thank you, Greg, for doing that. And so all of you, and I know this is hard, so all of you need to be on your best behavior. Needs you two back there in the back, Charlie Holloman.
Before I do introductions, one real quick announcement. Lucky me got volunteered to be the stop chairman for the Air Race Classic, which is coming through Mount Comfort, aka Indianapolis Regional Airport. June 20th through the 24th is the Air Race Classic. The expectation is that most of the planes will come through Indianapolis, weather permitting, on June 20th, and some stragglers on June 21st. If any of you are interested in volunteering and helping with that, I absolutely could use your help. June 20th will be a very long day out there at the airfield, and I'm hoping to run people on and off the airfield in shifts so we don't bake anybody if the sun's out, and we get to avoid the heat exhaustion that may happen in June. So if you're interested, come see me after everything's done. I'll be somewhere up front here milling around. So thank you in advance if you volunteer. Tonight, we have two speakers, but our keynote speaker tonight is Congressman Rokita. He has a long list of accomplishments. He was our Indiana Secretary of State from 2003 to 2011. He's now our representative in the House of Representatives. I think the thing that would be most noteworthy to a room full of pilots would be that our congressman was the co-author of the Pilot's Bill of Rights. And he'll be speaking about some of that tonight during his presentation. And then for just a few minutes, 10 minutes or so afterwards, Dr. Stan Adkins will come join us. Dr. Adkins was born in Logansport, schooled in the Caston school system in Fulton County, attended college at the University of Indianapolis, IU School of Medicine, and he, to a room full of pilots, probably the most notable thing on his long resume of medical accomplishments, he's the senior aeromedical examiner for the FAA in our area. So, without further ado, let's give Congressman Rokita a nice round of applause.
Thank you very much. Great job. Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone. Greg, can you hear? Are you picking up sound? Okay. Wonderful. Well, Mike, thank you very much for that introduction. It was really done well. It sounded better than when I wrote it, so I really appreciate that. It's good to see such a full room of pilots out there and that are still active or that are wanting to be active, whatever the situation is. You know, we're really having a shortage in the country right now, and it's been in decline for decades, whether given the expense or lack of interest from younger people or what have you. I don't know, but the third class medical, which I wrote in 2013, that came on the heels of the petition that not only AOPA but also the EAA wrote to the FAA, which was ignored by them, is meant to try to change that. It's not a silver bullet in any respect, but that, along with some other changes that we're working on, that the alphabets in our beloved hobby or industry are working on, I think will have a very positive effect. If you can tell, I got a few frogs in my throat. I don't know if it's allergies or what, but the blessing for that is that you're not going to get to hear me talk very long. So I don't know when last time you heard a public servant say that, but I'm going to turn it over to the doctor pretty darn quick. I was supposed to be I was supposed to be here tonight, but my son, our 7-year-old, I go out to Washington during the week, and Mike says I'm your representative. I might not be your representative geographically. I represent from Lake County to Logansport to Kokomo to Lafayette, around the northern and northwestern and southwestern suburbs of Indianapolis, down through Mooresville and over to Greencastle and down to Cloverdale. It's the biggest district in the state, and it's good for a former Secretary of State who used to do 92 counties. But I might not be your representative geographically. But when it comes to aviation, certainly within the delegation, it's something that we focus on as a team in my office, something that I've lived since I was 19 years old and got my private pilot certificate. I have a commercial certificate now, an IFR rating, and I fly with partners a Seneca 2, which we love. And I think between me and my partners and the bank, Paul said I'm an aircraft owner. I think I own the left wheel, which has a new tire as of the annual, so that's good. But I also have a team with me today, and I want to introduce not only Zach O'Connor, who's from my Danville office. He's right there. Went to IU, did not play ball, but probably could have, and acts as my bodyguard on occasion when we need it. It's not going to be this room tonight, but you're doing a great job. And also my legislative director, Parker Reynolds. Parker, stand up, please. Parker helped write. He's really the guy who did it. who soldiered on and made sure that third-class medical reform got done. I mean, we even sent the man to deal with senators. That's how bad it got at some point. So he deserves your respect and applause, and thank you for giving it to him. But my boy, who's 7, like I said, I go out to D.C., I work there, my family stays here. I sleep in my office, I come home, and my boy just started as a 7-year-old Little League. And I couldn't make it tonight because I was going to be here. But to show you whose son he is, he told me, he goes, well, maybe you can tell the people how I'm doing during the game. Such a ham. I mean, such a ham. So the game update for my wife, Kathy, is he has had 2 at-bats, 2 good singles, playing great in the field. He's at shortstop, stopped 3 balls, tagged out a runner, and he's big smiles tonight. So. Which is the big smiles part is the key there, because with that 7-year-old little 7-year-old on the field, I mean, tears come out at the crack of a bat, so to speak. Paul, you've been a friend of years, a friend of tears. I really appreciate knowing you all this time, especially when times were simpler, as we talked about at the table. So thank you for inviting me. Any remarks you don't like, I will own. To the extent you like what's being presented tonight, please thank Paul and Mike for reinvigorating this club. And I'm becoming a member as of tonight. I didn't know too much about the Aero Club, but I will become a paying member of the club. And I invite all you who are not members to do the same thing, because I think, again, this is part of our rejuvenation. So let me just get right into it. The history of third-class medical reform. In December of 2013, I filed the General Aviation Pilot Protection Act. It was introduced in the House. And that basically was driver's license medical. If you had a state-issued driver's license, what business is it of the FAA anymore if you're not flying for hire? And that might sound flippant. I don't mean it to be that way, but we had a lot of education to do with members of the House of Representatives. And by the way, the General Aviation Caucus is one of the biggest. There's over 200 members of Congress in the House alone that are members of the General Aviation Caucus, and that's the biggest one out there. So that's good, but they're not pilots. So when Todd Rokita from Indiana was coming to him and saying, you know what, we don't need to examine pilots who aren't operating for hire, I mean, it's as if I was coming in from outer space or something. And I said to him, so there was a lot of education. I said to him, well, listen, when you drove in to work today, or when you were driving back in the district in your state, you saw an SUV, certainly, yeah. You saw an SUV probably within a couple feet of you driving 60 miles an hour, yeah. Well, what assured you of the medical condition of that driver? Operating a vehicle that's much heavier than most of our aircraft. No idea that person's age, no idea that person's medical condition. You assume he or she had a driver's license. And if so, you then could assume that they might have had their eyes tested. But that's really about it. And so light bulbs started going on, and we got a lot of traction. Parker, at the time, I think we got 163 co-sponsors for GAPA alone in 2013. But it didn't go far. And I think one of the reasons it didn't go far, I tried to do it as a standalone bill, I tried to attach it to must-pass legislation, and in addition to the education that needed to occur, we also had really no one from Indiana at the time on the Transportation Committee. Certainly I wasn't. And so it was hard to get, when you're not on a committee, it's hard to get the committee to move on some things. So we corrected that. In the next Congress, I joined the Aviation Committee, and I love it. Or excuse me, the Transportation Committee. I'm on the Aviation Subcommittee. We love it. We're doing some great things, as I alluded to earlier. Then came February, so now it's February 25th, 2015, the next Congress, and we filed the Pilot's Bill of Rights. So many of you know from your aviation articles and reading that Senator Jim Inhofe is a legend in the Senate. He's 80-some years old now, still flies. And when he digs his teeth into something, he is the best partner to have. He will not let it go. And that's what we had in 2015 with the Pilot's Bill of Rights, which was more than my GAPA bill. It was some tort reform and some other things, but the heart of it was really this third-class medical reform. And so we marched on. And then through the process, as this timeline shows, December 15th, February 3rd, 2016, the language changed. Several of our Democratic counterparts, especially in the Senate, were not buying into this driver's license medical idea. And so like many things in Congress, things get a little bit watered down. The C word is employed, compromise. And I don't even use that word anymore because it's not very accurate. A better term would be a trade. When you compromise things, you give up your principles. You compromise away things. When you trade, you're giving away something that's very important to you, but you're getting something very important in return. And that's what ended up to be this law. We found a FAA reauthorization opportunity in 2016 to attach this language to, and we did that. That's considered a must-pass piece of legislation, or else the FAA was going to fail to operate. And we got the deal announced, and we passed third-class medical reform as part of the FAA funding bill in July of 2016. And what it ended up being was basically, instead of seeing an AME, you can see your family doctor every 4 years, perhaps as part of your regular examination. And if he signed a form, a checklist, you were okay. And it was as simple as that. Why don't you go ahead, Parker, on to the next one. No, where it lists all the things that it does. Oh, is that it? Was that down there? Okay. So here is what the final bill that was signed into law by President Obama allowed. Not authorized to carry more than 6 occupants, has a maximum certified aircraft weight of not more than 6,000 pounds. Day or night, VFR or IFR. And that's actually an improvement. Remember when I talked about trading? My original GAPA only allowed for VFR flight. Not because there was any rhyme or reason to it. It was because someone who was in Congress longer than me, who knew general aviation well, said the FAA and other members of Congress will never let you fly instruments without a medical. So I just took it out. But it was completely arbitrary. And come to think of it, in the end, we got IFR back in. So that's one of the things that I think was improved. Take up to 5 passengers plus the pilot. So I guess the seats don't matter, but you could take up to 5 passengers plus the pilot. You have to take a course, and conveniently AOPA has a course available. The physical examination, at least once every 4 years, a physical exam from a state licensed physician includes the checklist and the signatures. Altitude restrictions up to 18,000 feet. I guess you can argue that was still arbitrary, but it seemed to coincide with other FARs, as you can tell. 250 knots indicated airspeed is airspeed limitation. You have to have a current state-issued driver's license. So if you don't have a driver's license, you have to get that first in order to employ this process. It's also important to know that the regular third-class medical procedure that we're all used to still exists. So it's not that this is the only thing that's available, and if you don't qualify for it, you're still out of luck. You can still try to go through the regular process if you want. That is still up and running, and it still exists. So the question I usually get now, and when we did this in Anderson back last fall, we certainly had a lot of technical questions, and we were all still learning how this would all work in practice. So let me go through a few of them. My medical certificate expired after July 15, 2006. Now, the reason that date is important is because we were able to negotiate into the final bill a look-back period. So if you had a valid medical certificate that expired any time within the last 10 years of the enactment date of the statute, you could go into this new process. You're automatically good. So after 2006, July 15th. Okay, next. What if your medical certificate expired before July 15th, 2006, and you haven't had a valid one since? If it's more than 10 years before the date of enactment, you will need to go through the medical certification process one more time, and then you can use the 4-year process with your family doctor. Next. My medical certificate has been suspended. If your most recent medical certificate has been revoked, suspended, or withdrawn, or otherwise denied, I think you could say, you must obtain a new medical certificate before operating under the new system. I have been diagnosed with a new medical condition. So, neurological, cardiovascular, or mental health, those are the big 3 we call them. If you have any of those conditions pop up, Since your last valid third-class medical, you may be required to get a one-time only special issuance medical before that, then you can enjoy the new process. So let's go through those, Parker, real quick. Mental health conditions, a psychosis, a bipolar disorder, a neurological condition, epilepsy, loss of control of the nervous system, or any cardiovascular condition like coronary heart disease, myocardial infarction, or even a heart transplant. That is to say, if you can get that done with the special issuance, you should be good going forward. I have been diagnosed with I already have a special issuance. If you already have a special issuance but don't suffer from one of the big three, you will never again have to go through a special issuance process again. You are good to go under the new system, seeing your family doctor once every 4 years. Let me say it again. If you've been through special issuance once and you have it, and it's not one of the big three, you're never going to have to go through it again. Oh, all right, little something. Maybe you all have the big three. I don't know. Next. So I'll clear out some other issues here, and then we're going to have Dr. Stan come up and get into some more detail on the medical side of things. And then we're both going to help answer questions, if that's okay. So I think we're speeding along pretty good here, Paul. We're good on time. The Fairness for Pilots Act. This is basically the rest of the Pilot's Bill of Rights. The things that we didn't get done after third-class medical. We're just calling it something different. We're rebranding it so we can fool Congress a little bit. But Senator Inhofe has it in the Senate, of course, and Sam Graves from Missouri and I are shepherding it in the House. So expanding the Pilot's Bill of Rights, the first one, increasing basic protections for airmen, shifts the burden of proof to the FAA when conducting investigations. And I think that's important. I have one of my favorite people in the world in the room, Bob Duncan. He's been my examiner for years and has been a mentor attorney for me for years back when I was in private practice and practicing what I could of aviation law. It's unconscionable that the government doesn't have the burden of proof. They certainly do in a criminal case, and these aren't criminal actions, but I think they should also have the burden of proof against a private citizen in a civil action. And this puts that perspective, I think, back in the right light. And then, unbeknownst to a lot of us, and hopefully it never happens to you, but flight service stations and contract towers. It's been very difficult for attorneys of pilots who have a pending legal matter with the FAA to get records from contract towers or the contracted flight service stations. So we're putting language in the Fairness Act, previously the Bill of Rights, to make sure that those who contract with the FAA have the same duties to respond to public records requests and attorneys' requests, and if you're representing yourself, your own requests in a timely manner. Next. So I want to end on it's going to sound like a bit of a sorrow note, but I want you to be aware of this because this is very important, I think. I'd love your opinion if you don't think it's important. But President Trump has agreed to ATC, quote-unquote, privatization. And that matters now because the last Congress, the chairman of the House Transportation Committee tried to pass ATC privatization. It was killed pretty easily. And the chairman of the Transportation Committee is a dear friend of mine. He is a fraternity brother. He is my officially assigned mentor in Congress. We actually get assigned members when we first come to Congress. He is a good man. I think he is completely wrong on this issue. Now, when I was your Secretary of State, Mitch Daniels and I, we were in the room together when we privatized the Indiana Toll Road. For the taxpayers of the state, we got a cash infusion of $3.8 billion that we sunk back into roads. We leased the road to a disinterested third party who collected tolls. That is privatization. What is being proposed as early as the next FAA reauthorization bill that's going to start moving here in a couple weeks is to not even lease the national treasure that is our airspace, but to basically give it to a private board, supposedly made up of all the different members of the aviation ecosystem, from airlines to general aviation pilots to You can name segments that aren't represented, but most are. And this board would have the responsibility and the opportunity to get everything from next gen done to access to airspace issues to fees being charged. Not for general aviation, but other kinds of fees. This is a big problem. It's a big problem because effectively the way this is being set up and the way it's being pushed by the airlines, we are giving the airspace to airlines. That's a problem because in this beautiful ecosystem that we have, that we'll rely on, where every segment relies on the other one, there's a risk that the airlines might not care about general aviation, and it's very real. Think back to the toll road that I just talked about. Remember, I used the word disinterested. We gave it to a consortium of a disinterested party who was interested in and had an obligation to maintain the road and collect fees. Ladies and gentlemen, what we didn't do is give the toll road to the truckers and say, I bet you'll take care of the cars too. I bet you won't restrict access to on and off ramps at certain times of the day when you're trying to move steel out of Northwest Indiana. I bet you'll be okay with the cars doing whatever they do at certain times of the day when you need to get to Ohio. That's what's being proposed here with ATC privatization. There are inherent conflicts in this beautiful ecosystem that we have. And you need a disinterested umpire, a referee, to make sure access is equal to all. And ladies and gentlemen, the fact of the matter is, pilots, we pay into this system, in my opinion, more than what we use through the gas tax. What the airlines want to do with this is amazing. It's admirable. I think, and it's come out in hearings finally. They want to go at 33,000 feet with their turbine engines. They want to go to flight idle at 33,000 feet and basically glide to the airport of destination, the big ones. Think about the fuel that they'd save. If you believe in conservation, think about it from that perspective. Think about the efficiency and the less flight delays. I'm sure there's still going to be some for weather. You can't avoid that. It's an amazing goal. It really is. And I want them to have it. But what happens when you have 30 airliners coming in, let's say to Indianapolis International, from 33,000 feet, all perfectly lined up to the second, where they just have to true up the turbines at the very end, at the approach of the runway, to make a good landing. But otherwise, it's all perfectly choreographed, it's all perfectly timed. But here comes Todd Rokita, and maybe some of his partners in the Seneca, and they want to go to Indianapolis International. Well, now what happens to that perfectly choreographed dance? General aviation just messed it up. Oh, I know what to do. I'm an airline executive now. And I have a board, and I have members on that board. And probably more practically speaking, there's staff members who work for those board members. And you know what? I'm a airline executive. I'm a FedEx executive. I love FedEx. I don't want to use this in a negative way. But you know how busy they get at a certain time at night. They're basically doing what I'm talking about now. What if they decide, you know what, those general aviation planes, they don't need to be at Indianapolis International at certain times, at certain days. And the minute, ladies and gentlemen, we allow our rights to be defined based on what we need, instead of based on what we've paid, we're going to lose. We can't see that argument. So this board is a bad idea because it ultimately can determine access. Who gets to use what resources at what time? And it should never be that way, in my opinion. So we have some work to do if you think like I do. There is a huge fight, and with the president on board with this, only because he doesn't know the details. I haven't been able to have this conversation with him. But when the president's behind something, when ATC privatization is in the president's budget, it is real. So I would ask each one of you to make sure you're talking to whoever you can talk to. The Indiana delegation, Misklowski, Walorski, Banks, Brooks, Messer, Bouchon, Hollingsworth, Senator Young, Senator Donnelly, and the administration from the FAA onward. And those of you who support Donald Trump, make sure he knows this is a bad idea if you agree at all or have a suspicion in agreement with whatever I'm saying. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Stan, and I'm happy to take your questions on GAPA, on third-class medical, anything else you want to talk about. Dr. Stan?
We all think that this is a complicated process, but there's a layer to it that has not quite yet been addressed, and that is who's going to fly our airways in 15, 20 years. I don't see third-class people coming into the office very often at all, new ones, that is. We used to, 4, 5, 6 years ago, have people coming into Indiana State, Purdue, various other aviation schools around the nation, and they're excited and young, and we don't see them anymore. If they fly airplanes now, it's on a video game. They don't have the skills or the interest, apparently, in moving ahead like we did. It's a bit of a problem, and we don't really know what to do with that, of course, but that is another reason the basic med and keeping the older people, none of us are older, but keeping the people that might be older in the flying population. I think Todd did an amazing job getting this through. It's very beneficial to us. It's very beneficial to aviation. We take care of about 6,000, 7,000 pilots, and the vast majority of them are first and second class. They're sharp, they're generally very nice people, they're fun to talk to, and the evaluation is the same as it's been for the last 50 years. The manual that I work out of is 264 pages long. It's written in a form of medical legalese. It's not hard to understand. It's not hard to do. It's a little bit hard to remember part of the time. So when people come in, we're always going to do kind of the same thing. We're going to get vital signs, make sure that these people are walking, talking, and sober. And then we'll examine them. And the examination is what we were taught to do decades ago. There's nothing different about it. The difference is that it is not a medical examination. It is a regulatory examination. They're not trying to keep you alive or healthy. They being the FAA and the government, are required to make sure you don't kill the people in your plane or the people on the ground within the life of your medical certificate. They really don't care if you die. So understanding that, it puts this medical in a whole different context, as Todd said. What are the chances of an airplane landing on you out of control? Pretty rare. What are the chances of the person next to you killing you in a car wreck? Significant. Those of us who drive in the interstate every day get jumpy. This is not my father's interstate anymore. The airways, ironically, have less airplanes. Well, not the big boys, they're out there all the time. And the corporates are taking over. They're flying, but they're not the ones we're going to hit. 18,000 feet, I can't get to it. 250 knots out of I can't get to that either. But the people that I'm going to run into will be in the pattern at my level, and there's not as many as we used to have. It's a bit of a problem. Now, when you come in for a basic med examination, there is still going to be a problem as to who's going to do it. I have contacted my malpractice organization, and they won't talk to me. That's my private one. And the reason is the tagline on the certificate says that basically I have to attest to the pilot's ability to fly an airplane safely, or fly an airplane. There's no way I can do that. I don't know what it takes to fly an airplane except mine. But what if it's a turbine? I really cannot attest to the skills necessary to do that. And in the last 50 years of my career, I've never seen anything that physicians signed off onto as to the ability of the person to do anything. It's very simple. Why not? We don't know what it takes to do that. Can I walk a tightrope? As long as it's about half an inch off the ground, I'm murder. You get me across the river, and that might not be so good for me. But it depends on the context of the attestation. That's a big problem. The second thing is that when the bill was checked by whoever checks those things of how much it would cost. They came up with costs for the physician being twice what anybody charges. I don't know where they went to get their costs, maybe California or New York, but it wasn't Indiana. So it came up with a false number, which actually helps us because we're not that high. The people that can do the examination under basic med are anybody who's licensed to be a physician. And we all know somebody that we can talk to. Just don't tell them about the attestation line. That's a secret. We don't tell anybody. I have some very close friends who can sign mine off, kinda, because I'm not going to sue them. And when you think about it, let's say the pilot dies. Well, the pilot's not going to sue me for signing something, but the family will. And I had no malpractice coverage. Now, I'm sorry to harp on that thing, but it's a big deal for physicians because we don't know how it shakes out. I assume that there's some way to address that later on, probably just get the malpractice companies to say, oh, it's no big deal. One of the initial arguments about doing basic med from the AOPA, EAA, was that there was no evidence of increased medical risk of third class versus first and second class pilots, and that is true. And that's because in the last 60, 70 years, there's never been a medical record of any kind as to who died of what condition before they hit the ground. So when you read about accidents, they say pilot died when they impacted terrain, nasty terrain. It doesn't say they had a heart attack and ran into terrain. It says they hit terrain. Well, you hit a terrain at 200 miles an hour, they're not going to find out if you had a heart attack. That's not one of the options. But interestingly enough, there are people that are curious, so they went back and checked sport med pilots. Now, these are pilots that had autopsies and toxicology tests after death. And then they compared it to a bunch of third-class pilots. And the sport pilot accident rate was twice as high as third class, and also was twice as deadly. But nothing says why. The assumption is that when I crash an airplane, it wasn't my heart, I just ran into something. The assumption they made was after the autopsy that that was a legitimate way to find out what happened. It's probably not. The real issue with sport pilots is lack of training. I had a very close friend die landing a sport plane upside down. Didn't work out well. The rest of us, we know that we're at risk to ourselves when we take off. But we're much more highly trained, at least have more hours than a sport pilot does. So no, safety isn't really the argument because no one has any facts or figures and they still won't. By the way, if you're wondering why have any of you gotten online yet to do this besides me? Yeah, it's fun. If you haven't gotten online yet, whether you're going to do it or not, get online because the online education is very poorly done. But it's better than anything else we've had. And it tells you things like, don't drink and fly. Golly. It tells you you should be rested and not make bad decisions in the air. I needed that one. It doesn't tell me how to fly a plane better. It will tell me about various visual hallucinations. I've never seen one of them. I've never seen a pilot who's seen one of them. The big boy pilots, yeah, when they have fatigue, maybe that's something you run into. The one thing that it does bring up is, you remember when Kennedy flew into the ocean and around Hyannisport? Why? He was flying a Lance, plane I fly. He was flying into a horizon that was demarcated by sky and water. If you get out on a boat at the right time of night, you can't tell sky from water. Well, he had a couple of hours of instrument training, but he wasn't instrument certified. And what it appears as though he did was something we've all done at some time. He reached down to tune the radios, and he'd already turned the autopilot off. Uh-oh. Someone forgot to tell him, don't tune the radios unless you have the autopilot on, because you get Coriolis effect. Your head gets confused. Well, when you got the frequency in, switched over to Hyannisport frequencies, he looks up, now his head is confused, and he's not on autopilot. So he does a graveyard spiral. Goes this way, says, uh-oh, goes this way, impacts the ocean at 200 plus miles an hour and kills 3 people. That wasn't a medical condition, that was training. That was training. We all know that. But we're alive, and he isn't. Now, when you get the basic med, the online part will ask for the name and the identifying number of the physician who did the examination. You'll get that at the time. That's his state licensure number and his signature. And you're supposed to keep that in your logbook, okay? You don't put your logbook in the plane, just like we're all taught. If someone wants to see your logbook, they'll send you a letter, then you send a logbook or a copy of it. Logbook stays at your house. The license to fly, it doesn't say where it stays. I keep mine in my billfold, whatever it is. It seems appropriate. But then when you take the online test, it goes to the AOPA, which immediately sends you a banner saying you did it. And it goes to the FAA. Why? They're not in it. Apparently, and you have to help me with this one, there's a look-back time when the FAA is supposed to determine in 5 years or so if more pilots died with or without. Best I can figure, that's not going to help us much because they don't have a baseline to compare it to, and they never will have, because people in third class without the basic med don't have any cause of death listed yet. In any case, this is a very good law. It's designed to help us keep aviation going for another couple of decades, another couple of generations. It won't change the way you fly, but when you take the part on the online, that's interesting. And by the way, there'll be different choices in there. Say if you're more interested in this, click on this box and we'll give you some more information. Click on every box that's in there and just spend an evening watching it. It won't take you more than an hour and a half. There are questions across the top. If any of you don't get them right, shame on you. These are don't drink and drive type things. And if you've flown very long, you're not going to do them anyway. It's just not a good idea. And then the certification comes to you. You keep one copy in your logbook, keep one copy in a safe. It is not kept by any regulatory agency, except if you belong to the AOPA, you can click a box and they'll keep it in their computer system, so you can get it back. It's kind of like the FAA. If you lose your certificate, you can call them up, and if you wait enough days, they'll send you one. By the way, FAA, there are only 15 docs that actually run the FAA medical. And I know most of them. They're nice people, they're intelligent, they're good physicians, and they're getting killed. It is common for them to work 12 and 14-hour days when they're in the bubble. They're answering my call. Like I'll call up to my people, there's 19 of them answering the phone, and I'll say, I need to talk to a doc. They'll say, okay, we'll go see if there's one available. Now, there's only one available per day, and they don't work on Tuesdays. This is Tuesday, isn't it? Yeah, I didn't get to them today. They'll take my number, and I've gotten calls back at 11 o'clock at night. They'll call me. Doesn't mean I want to talk to them at that time, but they'll call me. So the problem was the sequestration a while back did decimate the FAA. I don't know how good they were before that. I don't remember, actually. But they're understaffed now, and it probably is not going to get... Oh, thank you. To aviation. The understaffing is probably not going to get any better. The part that's going to help them is the fact that there's a whole bunch of us who won't have to call them. Third-class pilots are more complicated than first or second. We get more things wrong with us because we're older. In our office, and then I'll start to wind this down, we have a test called a cardiopulmonary exercise test. It's a way to determine if pilots have early heart disease. We've done about 7,000 of them so far. The incidence of a pilot and a non-pilot having subclinical heart disease, this is way before they get in trouble, is the same until age 50. At age 50, the professional pilots have more heart disease. I don't know. When you talk to professional pilots, they have a terrible life. They're tired, they're eating terrible food, they've got terrible shifts. The glory disappeared many years before I see them. So those that do fly for fun, they've got a PITS or they practice aerobatics or something, and that's how they keep their enthusiasm for flying. A lot of them still like flying. We have some professional pilots here, or former professional, Anybody, I gotta ask, anybody here that's a professional pilot now? Good, I can say anything I need then. But they're working hard for a living. And the conflict that Congressman is talking about between them and us is quite real, but it doesn't come from the pilots. It looks like it's come from the pilots, it comes from the pilots union, but it mainly comes from the corporations that have a dog in the game called money. So we support Congressman completely. By the way, I'm the first one volunteering for your next campaign. And if we have any questions, please feel free. Todd and I will try and answer them. Yes, sir.
Okay, what's view does the FAA take on people that need supplemental oxygen at sea level?
Good question. All of us know that at altitude we've become hypoxemic. And I carry a finger thing. And I will allow myself at 12,000, 11,000 feet to get down to a 90. Any lower than the 90 and I get jumpy. Yes, like that one. He's holding up a finger thing. And if you don't have one of the, yeah, careful, yeah. It's oxygen monitor.
$45.
$25. These used to be $500, but they've been produced in such demand now that they're very good to use. Again, I'm not aware of any limit for flying. There are definite limits published in the manual that we use. I'd actually have to look them up as to what you can fly with if you have oxygen. Like if you're at 60 and you should be 99, you probably shouldn't take off. If your saturation with your oxygen is okay, like above 90, there's a better ball game.
Sounds like what you've indicated that it may be difficult, and this has been mentioned before in the various articles and so on related to basic med. It might be very difficult to get physicians in general to sign off on this basic med.
If they are familiar with that tagline, I was told that Dianne Feinstein is the reason it's on there. I've not asked Todd, it may not even be true. But somebody put a tagline on there that changed the liability. And it's the last thing. And by the way, the penalties are still $250,000 and going to jail. So, I should mention this. And then I'll shut up. There was initially a concern that pilots might not answer certain questions because there's right now 14 drop-dead topics. You can't have 14 certain conditions. Now there's 3, neurological, psychiatric, and cardiac. If you had a heart transplant, by the way, anybody know Carol Shelby? Yeah. Carol Shelby had a heart transplant and started the Indianapolis 500 in the pace car. He was a pilot too. So you can fly with a heart transplant. So the issue is if you're crazy, and they define that as being you did something. You went around and beat somebody up. You punch a hole in the wall with your fist. Something that just is really not quite normal, that person shouldn't fly. If you hear someone in the pattern who's yelling and cursing at everybody else in the pattern, that person shouldn't fly. But basically there's just 3 categories. Heart disease, if you have a heart rhythm abnormality, that's not even listed. And that used to be a big one.
Yeah, thanks, Doc. I pulled up the checklist that you have to sign, and the language that I think you're referring to, certainly the language that caused me concern when we were negotiating the final bill was, I certify that I am not aware of any medical condition that, as presently treated, could interfere with the individual's ability to safely operate an aircraft. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. And this concerned a lot of us in Congress, but it was, I don't know if it was Ms. Feinstein, it was, I know that Senator Bill Nelson of Florida certainly had a hand in many concerns about us doing this at all. And basically this language is a product of the sausage making. This is what we needed in there if we were going to have any improvement at all. It's as simple as that. So the verdict's out. Will this be an impediment to the regular family physician in signing this? I had one gentleman here say no. One physician say no, it's not a problem at all. Or does this language mean that basically AMEs who are familiar with the system are going to still do this kind of work? They're just going to do the checklist now, and they're going to do it every 4 years. Or for a third option that I just heard tonight is, from a family physician or an AME, which this man is, his insurance company apparently is telling him that he can't do this.
They won't comment.
They won't, or whatever, they won't commit. So there's some questions out there, but we're going to look at this optimistically. We're going to try to make this work.
Yep.
And I encourage I would encourage your family physician to sign this. I'm not their lawyer.
This is a very, very good law. I think it is safe to do it, but the government has told me specifically if I do AME work outside of the government, I'm not insured. And our insurance company will not answer my phone call after 3 months. So we don't know.
I had an experience on the 3rd of May. I called my AME group in Brownsburg, Brett Graham. He's not a pilot, a good guy, and he's done my 3rd class for years. And he wasn't available, so I got another guy in the practice who I don't even know, but he's a pilot. The nurse said, yeah, we had a staff meeting, we know all about basic med, sure, you'll be one of the first 3, we'll sign you up for, that was on, I think, a Thursday. 2 hours before my appointment, they called and said, we're not doing them. That was last week, on the 3rd. And I said, why? She said, would you like to talk to a doctor? He gets on the phone and he says, our insurance company is vague and non-committal, exactly what you said, and we're just not going to risk it. And I thought, okay. So I called AOPA, and by the way, if you guys don't use the AOPA, that little extra bump they charge you for their legal and their medical, it's foolish. It's the best money you'll ever spend. They've got doctors on a retainer, and you'll be on a first-name basis with their nurses. It's great. I called them and I said, is it working? She says, this is day 3, and we've encouraged our members to call us and tell us what happens. We had 1,523 as of May 3rd that went through it with no problem. I said, how many didn't? She said 4, including you. So, I don't like to be in that club. So their recommendation was go to a walk-in clinic that does commercial truck driver's licenses. They're not afraid of anybody because they deal with truck drivers. That's a quote. She says, and half of them are on drugs or drunk. And they So I said, well, I know one of those guys, and not the truck driver. And I said, yeah, I get my CDL at my doctor's office. I said, the problem is it's a nurse practitioner. She says, well, the doc will have to sign it. But all NPs work under the supervision of a doctor anyway, right? Yeah. So I called my doctor and I said, I want a DOT physical. I didn't say FAA, I just wanted to hook him on the appointment. And I'm going in tomorrow. Now, when I whipped that thing out, I filled it all out, just like you guys are talking, Todd. You got the form, everything's filled out, pre-existing, everything. And by the way, you're starting over. You can't say previously disclosed on conditions. You got to put a gallbladder 40 years ago has got to be there again. So I'm going to go in tomorrow, and I'll let Paul know how it goes. I'll be the guinea pig. I was talking to the QBs last night, and 2 guys in that group just got it done, and a whole bunch of people, just like this room, are waiting to see what happens. And I had heart surgery a year and a half ago on a mitral valve repair, and I'm eligible. My cardiologist signed me off, had all the Holter monitoring, the stress test, and all that. 2 days before my appointment, AOPA said, don't do it. Because if they give you a conditional, you're going to have to do a stress test every year for the rest of your life. And you'll lose the freedom you have now of letting your medical expire gracefully before my surgery. So I've been waiting for this, like I'm sure a lot of people in this room are. And I'm not going to give it up, because if I go back in there, I am tagged for life. And it's not even disqualifying, am I right, Doc? I mean, off the cuff, you don't know me, but I had a
Yeah, but you look honest to me. That kind of surgery, yeah, it is so good nowadays. We have a guy with 24,000 hours, and he had it done. A quick, interesting to me thing. I heard his murmur. It wasn't what they said it was, so we sent him in, got it worked up, had a valve, got it fixed. In the heart cath before it, they found he had a 99% narrowing of his left anterior descending. 99%. Crap. He didn't have any symptoms. They saved his life. 'Cause that one would have got him. It wasn't the valve, it was the artery next to it, totally unrelated.
Did he have a bypass and he's back fine?
He did, and he's back fine.
Isn't the rule no blood thinners and no valve replacement?
I'm sorry?
No blood thinners are permitted, is that true?
You can cheat on some of them,
I'm
yeah.
not taking them.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as you have a record that you've been controlled most of the time, you can use Coumadin and Xarelto and stuff like that. On a case-by-case basis, it's approved.
Thank you.
Charlie, did you have a question?
The NTSB had said for many years, 80% of all aircraft mishaps are due to human error. The airlines have been training crew resource management training, loft training, loss training for 45 years with good results. What effort is being made to teach those same skills to civil aviators?
Boy, I don't think that's probably part of this
Bob
question and
Duncan.
answer period.
Bob Duncan would know, though.
Yeah, I don't, that's probably outside of this conversation, Mary. But it's a good question, however, I mean, cockpit resource management is a.
Do a plug for,
exceptionally one.
do a plug for
But everything that Todd talked about is in CRM.
You know, that might be a good question for Mark Baker next month. That might be a good one. Any other questions?
Congressman, are you saying that a doctor, maybe he's operating out of Norfolk, Indiana, the only thing he knows about airplanes is they make white streaks in the air? Would he be qualified to sign off somebody that could fly an airplane?
So the question, in case you didn't hear John's, was can a physician who has no aviation experience whatsoever perform this checklist and sign you off under the new rules? And the answer is yes.
Well, I just comment on Todd's ATC privatization. It reminds a lot to me of the NERC and FERC with utility companies. And, 2003, they had that 20 people died, and because of a tree that went down, they were asleep at the wheel up in Akron, Ohio, all Northeast was out of power. And it took them 13 years. It's the same kind of situation, the NERC and FERC, where you've got a private board and they're made up of a trade association people in that industry. It took them 13, 14 years to come up with a vegetation standard. And it moves terribly so, and it's always in favor of utilities. So I would just ask everybody to get on board with Todd and get a hold of Trump, get a hold of Pence, get a hold of your representatives and say, no, this is not a good idea.
What's the name of it?
This is the air traffic, I use an acronym, I'm sorry. It's air traffic control privatization, basically. And the latest attempt, it was attempted last Congress too, is it going to come through this year's FAA reauthorization. So we got to be on the lookout for it. And the main question to ask is, what problem is it trying to solve? Certainly the FAA is terribly slow, and it is a bureaucracy. And by the way, all that stays. They're basically just taking the air traffic controllers out and running air traffic control under this board. The FAA bureaucracy is still very much going to be there. So it doesn't solve that problem. And they say, well, next gen is behind schedule, and it is. But I don't see how this board is going to solve that at this point, especially with the risks that I've outlined.
Anything else? Thank you so much. Josh.
Thank you, guys. Doc, thank you, buddy.
One of the things that excited me about having these two come speak is the fact that they are both pilots and aircraft owners. And I think that's an important part of this. Sometimes it feels like it's a war for general aviation today, and it's great to have such great advocates. Before you go, really quickly, June, our speaker is Mark Baker, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, president of AOPA. I think that'll be a fantastic speaker. You're not going to miss that. July, we're trying to get the president of Swift Fuels to come speak. The 100 low lead is soon to go away, and they're already manufacturing fuel, so that'll be interesting. August is our picnic fly-in at Metro Airport. September, we're very excited about this as well. Jack Pelton the president of, chairman of EAA. And October, Jeff Lumpkin with Sebring Avionics is going to fly up and talk to us about ADS-B. So I'm excited about that. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Stan. It was fantastic to have you here. I also wanted to mention we have our former president and chairman, Faye McDaniel, here tonight. It was so beautiful to see you here as well. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Have a very great evening, and I look forward to seeing you next month.